We're going to check our 2 homework problems, and then we are going to do number 3 on the independent practice together so that you know exactly how to set it up in your math book, because you're not going to have enough space to show your work in your math book. So we're going to do that. We're going to show work on a separate sheet of paper, but you already have that separate sheet of paper. Okay, so let's look at homework. The first problem was 3 times 74. What is the here, let me move this so that you guys can see it.
We could see it.
Oh, it just, could you? Maybe you, I'm looking, whatever. Oh, well, I'll write it again. Okay, what's the very first thing you should do, Zadie, when you're using distributive property to multiply?
Very first thing you would do is you would put 3 times 70 in parentheses.
How do we know that we do that? Before we even start writing our equation, what do we need to do? What is the very first thing that we were doing? Victoria.
We take the larger factor and we split it.
Decompose it.
We decompose it to 10 units.
So we decompose it into what form?
Expanded.
Expanded form. So Victoria, which factor, 3 or 74, do we decompose into expanded form first?
The larger than
Which one is that? 74. And what does 74 look like in expanded form?
70 plus
70 plus 4. Okay, so now we know our larger factor in expanded form. Aaron, what do we do next?
We take the smallest factor
Okay.
and we multiply it by
So we take our smaller factor and we multiply it by what? Are we going to go ahead and multiply it by 74? Are we only going to multiply it by 70? We're only going to multiply it by 70, and there's our answer. Are we only going to multiply it by 4? No. So what are we going to multiply it by? So we're going to multiply it. Make sure you're paying attention. Pencils should not even be in your hands. We're going to multiply our smaller factor by each part, each piece of our larger factor. So we're going to multiply it by the 10s and the 1s. Ari, remember, camera tilted down so I can see you and what you're working on. So that means I'm ready to write my equation. What does my equation look like? Carla, what does my equation look like? Don't forget to tell me.
My equation will look like 3 times 30 plus 3 times 40.
3 times 70 plus 3 times 4. But how do I know which parts to do first, Carla?
You put in.
Who can help her out? Carla, don't forget to mute yourself. Who can help her out? How do I know which parts to do first? Michaela?
put your comma.
Not commas. What are those things called? Starts with a P. Mason, what's that word? Colin, what's that word?
Parentheses.
Parentheses. Make sure you have an answer before you put your hands up. So you put your parentheses. Where do I put the parentheses, Michaela?
At the beginning of 3,
So just tell me, around what?
3 times 0.
So I put it around my what?
Smaller.
What am I'm trying to say, we don't have to go and say put a parenthesis here, put a parenthesis here, put a parenthesis here, put a parenthesis here. We're past that point. I put the parentheses around which parts of my equation? Victoria?
3 times 70 and 3 times 40.
Which parts are that? We don't even have to go that far. We can just say one word. The what?
The equation.
That would mean the whole thing. Which parts of the equation? Kingston? These are all numbers. Smith?
Around each multiplication problem.
Around the multiplication problems. We don't have to go, once we learn a skill, we don't have to keep going step by step by step by step by step. We can skip a few steps and just say, okay, we're not going to say put a parentheses before the 3 and after the 0 and then before the other 3 and after the 4. That just takes a lot more time than we need to. We can just say put the parentheses around each multiplication problem. Okay, so if your equation does not look like this, you need to do it with your red pen. Is that red? Oh, okay. Now what do we do? Let's see, Michaela.
Now we're going to add, you're going to multiply 3 times 7.
So I'm going to multiply this part represents which partial product? The 10s or the 1s? The 10s. So I'm going to multiply the 10s first. Then I'm going to multiply which part, Michaela? After I multiply the 10s, I'm going to multiply what part?
3 times 7.
Which represents which part?
The 1.
The 1s. And what happens with this plus sign?
You add them together.
Well, what happens with the actual plus sign, with the symbol itself?
It's going to add those together.
What happens with the actual symbol? Zadie,
You bring it down.
I bring it down. So I solve the 10s and the 1s, and I bring the plus sign down. Okay, 3 times 70 is what, Smith?
210.
210, because our basic fact is 3 times 7, which equals 21. There's 1 0 at the end of our factors. So I put 1 0 at the end of my products to get 210. Then I bring down my plus sign. 3 times 4 is what, Ethan? 12. Now what do I do, Kingston? I add them together. Kingston, am I going to have to do any regrouping in any of these places? No, so I can just add them side by side. 0 plus 2. Start with the 1s. 0 plus 2.
2,
Start then the 10s. 1 plus 1.
2,
Then the hundreds. 2 plus nothing.
2.
So that means 3 times 74 equals what, class?
222.
222.
222. So make sure you have this answer. Make sure that your equation looks like this, because that's what we were doing yesterday. That's what all of our practice problems looked like. So this is what yours should look like, since we were working with the distributive property. Okay, make sure you have all of that written with either your pencil from last night or your red pen from right now. Can I erase it so we can do the other problem? Okay. So that was 3 times 74. You are turning these back in, so you better be correcting. Remember, there's only 2 problems, so if you get one wrong, what's the most amount of points you can get, or what's the greatest score you can get? A 50, because each problem is worth 50 points to get a 100. Okay, the second problem was 4 times 26. Oops, that's me. Zari, what do we do first? Zari, what do we do first? You're still muted.
You would break down your 26.
Into what? How do we break it down?
20 plus 6.
Because we are decomposing our larger factor into its expanded form. So 26 looks like 20 plus 6. Okay. Now we're ready to write our equation. Cullen, what does our equation look like? Don't forget to tell me the symbols and where they go. You can tell me where the symbols go from the beginning. We don't have to go back and put them in because we know exactly what it should look like.
20 times 4.
Well, what do we need first?
Parentheses.
Okay?
20 times 4.
If you have, oh, what comes after 4?
Parentheses.
If you have 4 times 20, are you wrong? Do you need to correct? No, because of why? If you have 4 times 20 instead of 20 times 4, why are you not wrong? Zadie. The commutative property, okay? But that's just the way Cullen chose to do it. If you have 4 times 20, you are right. If you have anything other than 20 times 4 or 4 times 20, then you are incorrect. Okay, what comes next?
Plus parentheses 4 times 6 parentheses.
I will say, try to keep your smaller factor in the same place so that you just don't confuse yourself. So instead of writing 4 times 6, let's write 6 times 4. You're not wrong, but you can go ahead and use your red pen to do that. Try to keep, it doesn't matter which one comes first, but try to keep your smaller factor in the same place. Does everybody understand? So if you decide to make your smaller factor the second factor, try to do it on both. If you decide to make your smaller factor the first factor, try to do that on both. Just so that you are sure in your mind, okay, here's my larger factor, here's my smaller factor. Okay, thank you very much. So we have 20 times 4 plus 6 times 4. Each multiplication problem is in parentheses. If you do not have your equation written this way, you need to do it with your red pen. Mason, what do we do next?
You multiply 20 times 4.
Because first I start with what place? This represents which place? Remember, place is ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s. Tens. So I multiply my tens, then what do? We're not going to get to that point yet because we need to show what is our next line going to look like. What do we do with this plus sign? So we multiply, which part of our problem does this represent? What place? The ones, and then what happens with this plus sign?
You take it down to the next one.
I bring it down to the next line. Thank you, Mason. Okay, so now I solve for my tens. Victoria, 20 times 4 is what? 80. I bring down my plus sign, and 6 times 4 is... what, Smith?
24.
24. Okay, what do I do now? Mason.
You add 8 plus 24.
I add my partial products. Remember, these are the partial products. Here's the product of the tens. Here's the product of the ones. Okay, Mason, am I going to have to do any regrouping here? Are you sure? Is any of my places going to equal a number that is 10 or more? Yes. So what does that mean I have to do? Well, I have to regroup, but when I have to regroup, do I solve it sideways like this, or does that just make it a lot harder for me? So what should I do with these two numbers since I'm going to have to regroup? We're going to add them up and down. So we're going to write them to the side, up and down. If you did not do this, do it with your red pen. And now we can add it easily. 0 plus 4, 8 plus 2, 10. So we have to regroup to the hundredths place. So, class, 4 times 26 equals what?
104.
104. Make sure you have exactly that on your homework. And then I'm going to come around and collect it. Okay. So now we're doing number 3. It says use the distributive property to multiply. Draw an area model. You do not have to draw an area model unless you would like to check. You do not have to draw an area model. We are past that for now. So we're just using the distributive property. Area models and distributive property are the same thing, but distributive property, the pencil and paper way, is a little quicker. Okay? But but they are the same exact thing. You're doing, Ethan, pay attention. When you are doing distributive property and area models, you are doing the same exact thing. You're finding the products of each place value separately. Mason, do not work ahead. You're finding the partial products of each place value separately, then adding them together. You're just not drawing the box. So, number 3, let's go to our separate sheet of paper. Remember to be neat. Do not do little bubbles all over the place, and make sure that you write the number of the problem. So, underneath number 1, because we did number 2 on the paper, let's put number 3. When you are showing work on a separate sheet of paper, what is the very first thing you should always do after you number it, Zari?
Can you repeat that?
Whenever you are showing work on a separate sheet of paper, after you write the number, what is the next thing you should always do?
Rewrite the number.
Rewrite the what? What number?
Your whole problem.
So my equation, so number 3 is 32 times 7. So on my separate sheet of paper, I'm going to write 32 times 7 equals. Okay, what's the very first thing we do? Zadie.
The very first thing you would do is take your bigger,
Louder.
you would take your bigger number.
What is that called? The part of the problem that we're multiplying together? What are those called? Who can help her out? What are those pieces called? What are these pieces of a multiplication problem called? Carla.
Factors.
Factors. So Zadie, what are we going to do first?
You would take the bigger factor and
It's also a science word that means the same thing. Just instead of numbers, it happens to animals and plants. What's that word? Who remembers? Michaela? Not expanded form. What is that, Kingston? Decompose. So we're going to take our larger factor and we're going to decompose it into what, Zadie?
into 30 plus 2.
Which is, what if no matter what the number is? So we decompose it into what? Come on, vocabulary is important. So we take our larger factor and we decompose it into, who can help her out? Smith.
We decompose it into expanded form.
So everybody pay attention to this vocabulary. You take your larger factor, decompose it, into expanded form. Remember, the factors are the pieces we multiply together. Decompose means to break down. Expanded form means a addition problem with the 10s and the 1s. So, what does 32, our larger factor, look like when we decompose it or break it down into expanded form? Zadie.
30 plus 2.
30 plus 2. Kingston, do we need to do anything else, or are we ready to write our equation? We're ready to write our equation. So what does our equation look like? Don't forget to tell me where symbols go.
7 times 30.
Well, what goes before? Before we even write any numbers, what do we put? Not a plus sign. Parentheses, okay? So parentheses, what?
7 times 30.
Louder.
Plus parentheses 2 with 7 times 2 parentheses.
Good. Okay, now what do? We have to say we're going to write what is going to end up on the next line. Carla, what do we do first?
We first solve the multiplication problems.
Which problem first? The
We
tens or
solved
the
the-
ones?
We solved the 10
The tens. Then we solve the,
ones.
and what happens to this plus sign, Carla?
It comes down.
It comes down to the next line. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and solve. Victoria, 7 times 30. 210, because 7 times 3 is 21. 1 0 comes to the end of our product, so we have 210. Okay, then we bring our plus sign down. Now we solve the ones. Cullen, 7 times 2 is what?
14.
14. Now what do we do, Michaela?
210 plus 14.
What's the vocabulary word that tells us what these are? Who knows? What's the vocabulary word that tells us what these are, Michaela? Partial products. Good. So we add our partial products, the products for our 10, the products for our ones. Is any of our places going to have an addition problem that equals something 10 or greater? No. So we can just solve it side to side. Add the ones. 0 plus 4.
4.
Add the tens. 1 plus 1.
2.
Add the hundreds. 2 plus nothing.
2.
So class, 32 times 7 is
224.
224.
224. So we need to make sure we don't accidentally forget to bring it over to our problem. Now I'm not just going to write 224 because I want to make sure I line my places up, right? So I'm going to put my 4 under my 1s, my 2 under my 10s, and then my other 2 in the place where the hundredths would go. Remember, when I'm writing answers, I'm going to write them backwards so that I can line them up correctly because I know I'm always going to have a digit in the ones place. Then I know the tens comes next, and then I know the hundredths comes after that, and so on. Okay, heads down, cover your eyes. We'll do a vote. Your choices are, we can do one more together, or I can let you go. Zari, make sure that your eyes are covered. I can't see them. If I see you peeking, I'm not going to count your vote. If you want to do one more together, raise your hand. Hands down. If you want to go ahead and go, raise your hand. Hands down. Heads up. Okay. If you want to go ahead and go ahead. Those of you that want one more, we'll do it together. So that means you are allowed to work ahead right now. Not any other time, only right now. Okay, so those of you that wanted to do one more, just raise your hands and I'll call on you to pick. Yes. No, I mean, like when I ask a question, you can raise your hand and I'll go in a circle, kind of. Okay. I'm going to be kind of quiet. So, we're doing number 4, 15 times 8. First thing I do, go to my separate sheet of paper, skip a line or two underneath number 3, and I write 4. Now what do I do? Kingston. We rewrite the equation. 15 times 8. Now what do we do? Carla?
You decompose 50
Into what?
into 10 plus 5.
10 plus 5. Good. Now what? Michaela? Do we need to do anything else or can we solve our equation? Or can we write our equation? I'm sorry. Okay. What does our equation look like? Don't forget to tell me that symbols and where they go. Parentheses. Now what? Carla?
You answer the 10s and 1s.
And what happens to our plus sign?
It goes down.
Okay, so let's do the tens first. 10 times 8. Michaela. 80. Bring down our plus sign. The ones. Michaela, 5 times 8. Now what do we do? Aaron? We add them together. What are these parts called? The partial product. Aaron, are we going to have to do any regrouping? You sure? Is there any place that's going to equal a number that's 10 or greater? Yes. So what should we do with those numbers? Write them up and down. 80 plus 40. Okay, now we can solve. 0 plus 0. 8 plus 4. So that means 80 plus 40 is, which means 15 times 8 is. Now, we're going to go back to our independent practice page and we're going to write our answer. But are we just going to write 120 or should we be careful to line our places up? Zadie? We need to be careful to line our places up. So I'm going to put the ones underneath the ones, the tens underneath the tens, and the hundredths underneath where the hundredths would be. Okay. You have until you have a little over 30 minutes to do your independent practice. Remember, show your work for every single problem. Show your work on your separate sheet of paper. Don't forget to write your answer on the math page. Everybody pause for a second because now we're going to talk about what to do and where. So numbers 3 through 11, we're doing the same thing. Even though 9 through 11 have a variable, does it change what we're doing? Are we finding a different part of the problem? No. Number 12, you have an area model. You have to figure out what equation you have an array. You have to figure out what equation that array is showing. And then you have to solve it using distributive property. So make sure you have this for every single problem, numbers 1 through 12, and then look at the back. Look at page 238, because you also need to show this for numbers 13 and 14. Do not come in here tomorrow without this for every single problem. Do you understand? Okay, let's look at the homework, number 15 is critical thinking with numbers. Number 16 is critical thinking with words. As soon as we're done discussing the homework and the independent practice, you're going to do number 16. Let's look at the homework. Numbers 1 through 3, you do not have to draw an area model. Do you show your distributive property on this page? Victoria.
No, because it can go through, because there's only that.
Exactly. Nope. Do not show your distributive property on these pages. Are you looking at the homework right now, Mason? Not a good idea. Look at the homework. Okay. So do not show your distributive property on this paper. You do not have to draw an area model unless you would like to do it to check. You do need to have the answer on the paper. Now look at the back, page 240. Numbers 4 through 9. You definitely don't have enough space, so you definitely have to do it on a separate sheet of paper. Numbers 10 and 11 are word problems. Don't forget, on the line, you need equation, answer, unit. Sometimes you might need more, like for number 10, you might need more you might need to put more down for your answer. Make sure you fully answer the whole question. Don't just answer the first part and say, I'm done. If there's more than one part and you don't answer every part, you lose a lot of those points. Make sure you have equation, answer, unit, and make sure you show your work on your separate sheet of paper. 12 and 13 are vocab. Number 14, there's really no work to show. You're matching the equation to the array. Any questions about independent practice or homework? Okay, go ahead. You have until 9:30.